我们正在面对一个越来越难以预知的世界，我们正在经历一个越来越显得不确定的时代。美国政坛再次进入特朗普时间，美国经济将会有什么变数？作为世界第一大经济体的美国和第二大经济体的中国，经贸关系将向何处去？看起来已经显得非常脆弱的全球经济，又将遭遇怎样的挑战？今天我将请来一位来自美国的老朋友，就这些问题和他一起进行深入的探讨和思考。
Trump won second term. He was the second president who won a long consecutive second term, right? So really remarkable. Can you give us an assessment for the 4 years ahead of us? Whether the American economy is going to continue to grow like by 2.5, 2.7, or lower down to like a 2 or even below 2?
It's hard to know. In the last couple of years, the U.S. economy has performed very well. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be difficult to continue the same type of strong performance that we've had since the end of COVID. There will be some issues that need to be confronted, whether it's a return of inflation, the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. Just extrapolating on the basis of the last few years, I think is a risky thing to do.
Come to Trump's trade policy, right? How do you evaluate those policies in his first term? Were they effective, and how likely he will really impose those tariffs?
The trade policies were not effective at all. The U.S. does not have, from an economic trade point of view, we don't have a China problem. We have a saving problem. Our overall domestic savings rate, if you add up the saving of individuals, businesses, and the government sector, is the lowest of any leading economy in the modern history of the world. In 2023, for example, our net national savings rate, which is adding up savings from all the sectors and adjusting for depreciation, was negative. Negative minus 0.2%.
Oh.
No country has ever had a negative net national savings rate.
I thought it was around 8% at least.
That's gross. I like to use the net because if you take out depreciation, you remove the saving that goes to replacing worn out or obsolete plant and equipment. That's the savings that's available to fund new growth in the economy.
Right.
And we don't have any. So we have to borrow surplus savings from abroad, places like China, Japan, Germany, and the like. And when we borrow that surplus savings, we run balance of payments deficits that drive a multilateral trade deficit. And that's a trade deficit with many, many countries. We had trade deficits with 106 countries. China was the biggest, although the Chinese share has come down, but that still leaves 105 other countries. The tariffs did reduce the Chinese piece of our trade deficit, but trade shifted to Vietnam, Mexico, Canada, Germany, many, many other countries. And the overall trade deficit expanded.
Yeah.
We had a record multilateral trade deficit.
It was close to $1 trillion US dollars.
Yeah.
Right?
So you can't fix a multilateral problem with a bilateral solution.
That's right.
It doesn't work.
The capital, as I said, I always said, has a leg. They walk away, right?
Yeah,
They go around the globe. But when I read the script of a speech by Lighthizer, it sounds like he actually believed in this. With high tariffs, then industry will go back to the United States, and the United States is going to reindustrialize itself. Then, people in his home state, which is Ohio, are going to have decent jobs.
Yeah. Well, Robert Lighthizer, to his credit, has held this belief now for over 40 years. And he used this approach to direct U.S. efforts against Japan.
Right.
We had major trade frictions with Japan. We forced Japan to change a number of its trading practices, whether it was respect to controls on Japanese car imports, encouraging Japanese companies to relocate and build plants in the United States. And the Japan piece of our multilateral trade deficit came down in the late 80s.
So you just mentioned how United States and Japan resolved the trade disputes in the 1980s. That is, for Japanese companies to invest in the United States.
Right.
Do you think that we can do this again for Chinese investment to go to the United States?
I think we should. But you asked me if you thought we would. And there's a difference between what we should do and what we will do.
Right.
What concerns me right now is that there's a very high level of animosity in the United States that is far in excess of the sentiment that we directed at Japan. Using foreign direct investment to establish greenfield new plant construction that would boost U.S. economic activity, that would boost domestic job creation, as the Japanese transplants have done since the 1980s. But the national security paranoia makes that very unlikely, in my opinion.
Capital has a leg.
We don't have a China problem.
What would you suggest for the Chinese government?
How do you feel about prospects for the Chinese economy?
What would you suggest for the Chinese government to counter this protectionism shock?
Well, I think China certainly was given an opportunity to develop an experiment, a trial run in 2018, 19, and 20 with the first round of tariffs. The Chinese response was, I think, twofold: to focus on new markets for direct shipments of goods made in China, but also to develop new connections for supply chain support for its broad industrial structure, and that will need to be intensified. The U.S. is clearly also putting pressure on its allies to join in whether it's export sanctions or other types of trade pressures on China. And that comes at a time when the Chinese economy itself is under much greater pressure than it was during the first Trump administration. And that certainly underscores the urgency for China to stimulate internal domestic demand to provide a cushion against an external shock. So, there's a number of things that China can be done. The most important lesson, I think, is that China needs to attend to its own economy to get its own house in order. In my teaching at Yale, I taught two courses. One course was on the Chinese economy, and the other was on the lessons of Japan, where I studied the rise and then the fall of Japan. The most important lesson that we learned from Japan is when the economy is hit by the types of problems that Japan was hit. Policymakers made a big mistake in moving too slowly. And so if they had to run it over again, they would have been much better advised to move quickly and to move with monetary, fiscal, and structural policies.
Right.
China is not Japan, but there's a lot of similarities. I think the government would be well advised to err on the basis that China is much closer to Japan than we might think. And if that's wrong, then you've provided a powerful stimulus in any case. But move quickly, don't delay.
Right.
And the external shock makes the speed of response critically important now.
Exactly.
The unique features have long rested on China's capacity to implement reforms. Reforms of its economic structure, reforms of its social structure, political structure, its governance. The magic of China is the courage and the strategic vision to implement tough reforms. How do you feel about prospects for the Chinese economy over the next few years in light of the actions that have been taken so far and what you expect to be taken?
The government now believe it should have some stimulus package to jump up the economy. Now the government has a very good start. In my own opinion, the government should do more, right? Particularly to stabilize the housing market and also to serve local governments' debt issues, right? What would you suggest for the Chinese government?
China needs to attend to its own economy to get its own house in order.
Do you think the United States is going back to isolationism? Do you still see some possibility for that? Do you agree? So the Trump's impact is not going to be limited to China. It's going probably to make the whole world unstable.
Yeah.
We can also think about, he's going to draw United States out of many international organizations. So it sounds like the United States is going back to the 1930s. Do you think the United States is going back to isolationism? And if yes, how long will that last?
I certainly hope not. I can see why you would raise that. I fear that a lot. I hear the rhetoric, and there are a number of actions that we just mentioned that he could take. But the world is very interdependent, not just on the production side, but from the standpoint of information, the cultural assimilation of many peoples who have migrated around the world. Very difficult to disentangle all of that. I think there's still powerful forces that want to keep the world together. We're facing many collective problems that we need to address together, like climate, disease, just having come out of a pandemic, if we don't need another reminder, the rapid spread of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity issues. This is not a U.S. issue. It's not a China issue.
Right.
These are global issues that require global solutions, and isolationism will not be at all appropriate or even helpful in addressing these collective problems.
That sounds like globalization is kind of moving toward an ending. Like Daniel Roderick has already used the word post-globalization paradigm. Do you agree?
I don't, but
You don't?
No, I think what worries me is globalization will be broken up more into blocks than each country pulling inward. One of the greatest developments that has brought the world together really for the last 35 years has been the growth of global value chains or supply chains.
Right.
And we've learned a lot through breakthroughs in logistics, technology, sharply reduced transportation costs. In accordance with the theory of comparative advantage, it makes great sense to break down products and even services into little pieces that are best done by countries that are best equipped to make that contribution to broad global production. That's not going to change. But because of national security type issues that get manifested in trends we call friendshoring now, where we operate together with only our allies, that vehicle for global integration will be focused more on groups of countries that feel comfortable working with one another. That will fragment the globalization. That would also be a serious problem and a waste of efficiency and resources for the broader world economy.
我们已经进入了一个新的时期，上一轮这种就是超级的全球化的时代已经过去了。我们对于中国在全球经济中的这个地位应该有一个清醒的认识。
I don't think we can go back to the past, right, for U.S.-China relations. But we got to find a way for at least a peaceful coexistence, and in some areas of collaboration. So do you still see some possibility for that?
I think it's going to take a lot of time. I'm hopeful that still that we can find a better way to re-engage. Sadly, in the United States, when people talk about China, and you mention the word engagement or re-engagement, it's like you said a terrible word. So I've written recently 2 books on the U.S.-China relationship. One sort of diagnosing the interdependence of our 2 economies with a concept that I called codependency. We're both dependent on each other. I really believe that, like your question indicated, that we have to re-engage. We need something to go alongside of diplomacy to really, I think, be much more effective in dealing with our joint problems. And I'm in favor, and my new book will feature, and I wrote about this in my last book, the establishment of a permanent mechanism for engagement between our 2 countries, which I name a U.S.-China Secretariat that works full-time, 24/7, on all aspects of our relationship. And it's built on a collaborative model of research, policy development, common databases, and dispute resolution.
Really moved, after all the turbulence, you still remain optimistic about U.S.-China relations.
Well, let's put it this way. I remain hopeful, and I'm passionate that our 2 countries must find a way to work together. I think it's going to be difficult in the next few years. If we can begin to make progress in building more effective collaboration models and reduce the animosity that has developed in the last few years, there will be great opportunity to do that. But I think over the next few years, it's going to be very difficult.
我们这一代，在我们一生里头，我们的这个真实收入啊，就是收入扣除了物价的上涨，大概平均要增长50倍左右。我估计呢，我们00后不太可能再有这样的机会了。但是你要想到00后呢，是站在我们的肩膀上，享受了增长的红利，你们的起始收入就会比我们这代人高得多得多。另外呢，每一代人呢，你都会遇到崭新的技术，所以你们的生活质量呢，会大大的超过我们这一代人。所以我觉得，即使是对于00后，你们的增长速度下来了，但是美好的生活还在前面。